Hi, so Calabash asked me a question, specifically, is it possible to calculate the separation and iron unmasking capabilities of a given coil size? Sorry it's taken me a while. I have been very busy, and the truth is, the deeper I dig into this question, the more I realize how insanely complex the answer is. Unfortunately, I cannot answer the question yet, but I can talk about how I intend to answer the question. Answering this question is a massive undertaking, and I've already poured probably 100+ hours into researching the math and physics behind the situation. Answering this question dips outside my areas of expertise, so I had to relearn some stuff and I had to learn a bunch of totally new stuff. So I'd like to stress that it's important for you, the viewer, to ask questions and look for flaws, because I already found one flaw in one of my older videos that nobody noticed, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So my approach to answering the question of how does coil size relate to iron unmasking and separation potential will be twofold. First, I will perform an experiment with several randomized trials that I have specifically designed to eliminate the confounding variable of coil geometry as it relates to target configuration, the current flaw that plagues every nail board test that I discussed in my prior video. Second, I will take a data-driven simulation approach in which I model the EM fields of a double D coil and feed it data measured from real-world objects into an idealized detector model and have it search exhaustively over millions of possible configurations to determine which coil size optimizes both ground coverage and target separation. Concerning the experimental approach, you might ask, how will I design out the relationship between target configuration and coil size? Well, if we use a computer to randomly generate target configurations, the advantage of one coil size over the other for any given geometry will be averaged out. We can view a metal detecting session as a random walk through a series of these randomly generated configurations. The detector that succeeds at unmasking in more of these random configurations will find more targets over the course of a detecting session. So the central question the original Calabash nailboard experiment poses is, which detector and coil size unmask better in this particular configuration? When we randomize the configuration and do multiple trials, it changes that central question to, which detector and coil size unmasks in more situations? Another way to phrase this is, given a random iron masking situation, which coil has a greater probability of unmasking it? By the law of large numbers, the coil size and detector combination that has the greater probability to unmask in any random scenario will unmask more targets in the long run. So if we find the 9-inch coil on the day is to unmask successfully in 80 out of 100 of these randomized scenarios compared to 70 out of 100 for the 11-inch coil, we can say confidently that the 9-inch has superior unmasking over a given detecting session. But I don't have the 9-inch coil for the DS2 yet. They haven't arrived in Europe, not unless you want to buy an entire extra detector. So I gotta wait to perform that experiment. Also, it would take a huge amount of time that I don't have. Also, there's a ton of other issues and limitations that still need to be worked out in that experiment. Now, I can already anticipate the response to this experiment, specifically that there's a difference between 2D iron unmasking and 3D iron unmasking. I'm not arguing that a 3D test wouldn't be better, but randomizing targets in 3D isn't feasible. I don't know how to do it. Also, based on my early simulations of the double D coil's EM field, it would seem that adjacent target separation is actually a much bigger factor than vertical separation. Indeed, if we recall the factoid written by Dankowski, he refers to adjacent target separation as being the variable they measured in their experiment. But that relates directly to my second approach to answering this question, specifically the data-driven simulation. So far, I've only managed to simulate the EM field of a double D coil, but even just simulating the EM field has revealed several insights into answering the question. This view you are seeing is a slice of the double D coil when viewed from the front side. The closer to red, the stronger the EM field is in that region. The EM field is not symmetric back to front, so it's helpful if we take a geometric mean over that space, which gives us this. So the first key observation here is that we have two distinct regions of behavior. We have a far field and a near field. In the far field, the field strength is distributed in a very homogeneous manner. In the near field, there's a lot more going on in terms of geometry. You will recall in a prior video I stated that relative field strength decreases with the inverse of the square of the distance. But that is only true from the perspective of the target. The resulting EM field from the object being magnetically polarized then has to propagate back to the detector to induce voltage. So relative field strength actually decreases with the inverse of the cube of the distance, and this approximation is less accurate in the near field and very accurate in the far field. That's why you folks need to double check me. I'm figuring this out as I go, and I don't have anybody to check my work. So we would expect unmasking to be more sensitive to coil geometry in the near field. The second key observation is that you can see this void region of reduced sensitivity where the signal is nulled in between the outer ring of the coil and the center band that I discussed in a previous video. It's always great to see a result like this confirm a behavior we observe in reality. That means what we are doing has some predictive qualities which contributes towards its validity and strength. A third key observation relates to 3D target separation. Specifically, if we ask the question, within this EM field, which direction of travel produces the greatest differences in target sensitivity? The answer is laterally. For example, if I move 1 centimeter vertically, the field strength doesn't necessarily change much. But if I move laterally, the field strength could potentially change significantly. This means target sensitivity is more impacted by their XY positioning compared to their vertical positioning within the near field region. Remember, a detector doesn't know where a target is at under the coil. It can only measure its response to the EM field at any given position. So adjacent target separation is what will have the most real-world impact in terms of unmasking, which means our experiment we intend to perform has a theoretical basis for its validity, despite being a 2D test. In fact, the unmasking behavior of a coil totally changes whether we are talking about objects within the near field or the far field. This is still just scratching the surface. I just want to stress that the situation is vastly more complicated than any single nailboard test is capable of capturing. So please, please, please don't jump to extreme and absolute conclusions. And don't let anybody convince you of them either. I won't have time to make any more progress on the simulation for a while. My programming time is currently entirely tied up with my video game business. But I do plan to complete the simulation someday and open source it so everybody can double check my math and analyze the internal workings. And I kind of want to put it into like almost a video game-like package so people can test specific scenarios with specific objects or do their own randomized trials without having to be a programmer. With this simulation, I will also be able to answer all sorts of cool questions like, what is the optimal coil size that maximizes both ground coverage and target separation? What are the advantages and disadvantages of any particular coil size and geometry in exact terms? So Calabash and History Revisited have been going back and forth, calling each other liars and shills and whatnot, when neither one of their nailboard tests demonstrate anything, have any predictive value, have any scientific validity. They're basically a single trial with a single configuration, a single target. I think Calabash used 2 targets in one of his videos, but basically there's no variation of parameters. And it's like analyzing a single coin flip. On one side, we have somebody who flips a coin and gets heads and says all coin flips result in heads. And then on the other side, we have some guy who flips a coin and gets tails and says all coin flips result in tails. And then they argue and call each other liars. When, quite frankly, both of their tests are bogus for the reason I discussed in my prior video. But they just keep going at it. And I guess they're just going to keep doing it and calling each other liars. And you can put down, if you have enough nails and enough targets, you can arrange them in some particular way that makes one detector win over another. So the configurations need to be randomized. That's why my experiment that I propose, they'll be randomized by a computer to eliminate bias. But, well, what can you do?